medication is sort of on the psychology, or on the wrong side of the supposed war between science and faith, because psychology is a science. And so it's kind of like, well, why would you be going over to the other side? And let me just say very briefly, my experience, I'm the same person. I do not see a war between science and faith. Science is the study of natural principles. Scientists may be atheists and say, well, therefore you don't need God because we've given you these scientifically based treatment programs. But years ago, a lot of the more rational, rigid atheists would say, no, the smarter you are and the more you're into science, the less you need God. Well, that in fact is not true. Just to mention, brought me in the head because I'm almost through, but we'll continue.
I'll tell you.
A study done by a woman, a Dr. Eklund at Rice University, that her study was, she wrote to 60 different professors at elite university scientists, Cambridge, Oxford, Duke, Michigan, Stanford, all these sorts of places, and asked them their belief in God. And guess what you find? Now, the fact is, scientists do believe as a whole in God less than normal everyday folk, but roughly half and half. So to say if you're a scientist, you're an atheist is not true. Roughly half the scientists do believe in God. But if you're going around thinking, oh no, that's part of science, that's against God, then I can see where people would have a concern. Practical issues. You know that medication is overprescribed and that drug companies are making lots of money working with doctors to get them to give medication. All that is true, but that doesn't change the fact that there are actual people who are concerned about depression and anxiety who are doing the studies and finding and that sort of thing. And finally, as Mike mentioned a couple of weeks ago, there's that sense of to take medication is to bow to culture. Culture says do what's easy, take a pill. You don't want to go through any more trouble than you want, and so therefore that's kind of the issue. And so you kind of go, I don't think that's what we're going to be saying, but that's kind of lurking in the background when it comes to, do I or should I take medication? Well, I don't want to do, but I don't want to just take the easy way out. So those are the thoughts I have. So
Let me ask this, just as y'all are listening to Dr. Cameron talk about the reasons that people might have questions about this. I mean, we're teaching this class because people asked us to say something about it. As he was listing through those, were there some that you thought, yeah, that resonates with me? I feel some of that. Anybody in the room? Yeah, I did too. I think a lot of us did. So I think whether you have heard it or you feel it yourself, or sometimes we feel something in our gut, and in our head we say, now I know that's not right, but we still have that gut feeling we have to deal with. We've talked about that a few times in the comments. So I want to ask you something, Dr. Cameron, that has been a consistent sort of question we've talked about. I remember Miss Polly said one week, she said to me, if you had trouble with your blood pressure, you wouldn't feel bad for taking blood pressure medication. But if you have trouble with anxiety, I think she's a friend or a family member who said, but I don't want to take a pill for that. And then I remember one week someone said, well, Jesus says, don't be anxious. So that doesn't feel like Jesus doesn't say, don't have high blood pressure. So talk to us a bit about this, the differences and the similarities between mental health and general health. We might think of, people say physical health and mental health. I bet you have something to say about that.
Okay.
Kind of language.
Okay. I think it starts with an inappropriate division between spiritual and medical issues. To say, well, high blood pressure is physical. Well, of course, what we know is that it's not just purely physical. Sometimes it is, but there are things you can do to help your blood pressure. And so, in a sense, we draw a line that's too strict. We say this is a spiritual issue. This is depression. That's a spiritual issue. This goes back there again to a sense that, in our whole view of human nature, what it means to be human. you have a spirit. And it's almost as if, I'm trying to put this in words, you have a spirit, and that spirit is somehow encapsulated from your life in your body. Your spirit makes decisions. Your spirit is almost like you're a pilot with a manual. You say, here, you're separate from all these problems. And if you want to go faster, slower, whatever, then you have a spirit that's somehow isolated. It's kind of a Greek idea, a Hebrew idea, and this guy would know more than I would, is that we are embodied, that we are not somehow separate. All this is part of us. And so we realize that we live in a fallen world, an imperfect world, and our bodies can have problems. Well, the deal is, our psychology is based in our brain. We think with our brain, feel with our brain, and it is part of this fallen world. We do that. And so, I'm not sure where to get at this, but I think a lot of clarity can be found when you realize there are mild, moderate, and severe problems. And I think what Jesus was giving was general principles. You know, we'll make the point that Jesus was not giving mental health manual, but Jesus, he was giving general principles that when we have mild to moderate problems, there's a great overlap in spirituality and medicine. But when you talk about psychology, psychiatry, medicine, so often you're talking about the more severe problems that have more biological aspects in and of themselves. If that makes sense. Can I give one example? Let's see. This is a teacher we both know, we won't say who it is, who says, well, okay, let me first talk about mild, moderate, severe. You say, what would be a moderate problem? We know what severe problem would be, for instance, with depression. To say, let's talk with this individual. What we find is with severe depression, I'm having trouble getting out of bed. I've been missing work because I can't get to work. I have a hard time dealing with the kids, so I'm sending them over to grandma's while I can be in bed. I don't even feel like I should be living anymore. And you realize that's a severe problem. And sometimes those folks need medication just to right the ship, just to feel like, okay, now I'm able to do what Jesus said. I think we don't understand that. But this friend I'm talking about would have what you call moderate depression, which is called dysthymic disorder. And what he said was this. I say, if you ask him, say, how's your family? Going great. Relationship with your wife? She's wonderful. Kids? They're doing well. You going to work? Yes. You're in church? All the time. You have a lot of good friends? Yes, I do. But he said, life is always a struggle. I feel this just moderate sense of he says life is a struggle because of the depression, and that's called dysthymic, with a moderate struggle. And what he said was, when I'm on Prozac or Zoloft, those are basically the same drug, do what I always do. But if I'm not on that, then life is a struggle. And more than that, sometimes people will tell you it has always been that way. They will say, I never remember when life wasn't a struggle like this. And so what you realize is that we are embodied. If something can go wrong with our liver or our heart or our brain, then therefore things can go wrong with neurochemical systems and the like.
Yeah, part of when I think I'm listening to these things theologically, this is a big question, like what does it mean to be a person, right? And I think, like we were talking about earlier with the worry about a secular world that says, well, you are only your body. You are only your neurochemicals and your hormones and your everything else. And of course, Christians emphatically deny any sort of materialist claim like that. But at the same time, if we abstract the self or the mind from the body, then we end up with real problems, right? Because we've all had the experience of telling our body to do something and it doesn't work. I remember Jenny was in the hospital one time and had a paralysis, and she would look down at her foot and she would say, "Wiggle your big toe," and the big toe did not wiggle, right? And that was not some sort of like lack of self-control. No one would look at her in that moment and say, "Now, Jenny, you need to pray that God would give you the fruit of the Spirit of self-control so you can wiggle your big toe." But likewise, because our brain is so connected, I think, to our mind, we imagine sometimes that they're the same thing. But it certainly could be the case that the spirit, the mind, the disembodied part of ourself is telling the mind, perk up or stop worrying about that. And the mind does just what Jenny's big toe did when she was paralyzed. It just says, I can't move. And the signal's interrupted. The problem is we can measure, we can use science, we can see what's happening with our brains a lot of times. We can't see what's happening with our spirits. And so when you talk about mild, medium, and extreme cases, I'm thinking about my grandmother who had Alzheimer's. And anybody here ever had folks with Alzheimer's in your family? You've worked with them, right? Don't you find yourself wondering this question? Is she really in there? Or is she gone? Right? Surely Alzheimer's would be one of these extreme mental, can't remember, it's connected with your brain and your ability to talk. You ever know someone who has dementia and they act in ways that are radically opposed to their normal values and behaviors? Or something like Huntington's disease that can make you very aggressive to your caregivers, even people you've loved for years. I worry maybe that we might hear it say Jesus and spirituality is good for the mild stuff, but if we get above that, forget spiritual. Now it's just physical. What would you say to that kind of? Is the spiritual involved at all three levels, or is it only involved in the mild level?
Well, see, I think spiritual is involved in all three levels, but that does not mean that therefore through the Spirit that you can overcome the medical. Take extreme examples. We know that people of the Christian Scientists would have sat and watched their children die who had appendicitis. And they said, well, no, this is something Jesus will heal. And we look at that and go, no, sometimes it's physical. I remember I had so we're kind of talking about the extremes here. So let me give an extreme. Those that have had friends who or family who have had Alzheimer's, I was amazed because I taught the class in psychology. I mean, I taught psychological disorders, and counseling, and personality theory, and all those sorts of things. And yet we went one time, this is just real brief, we went to visit her at her medical center, and we were able to take her out to go get hamburgers. So it is up in Kansas City, Smash Burgers. If anybody knows about Smash Burgers. Well, we went, and the weird thing was, it was in a flood, lightning, darkness, flood. Little cars were floating as we were going to get, so we went. Of course, she was amazed. With Alzheimer's, it's amazing that during this time, first of all, before we left, she had played the piano beautifully. And also while we were there was a sign that said Smash Burgers, but for the people on the outside. Well, from the inside you had to read it backwards. Well, she read it backwards perfectly. But we have dinner, we go back. I said, I need to go use the restroom. I'll come back. 2 minutes later, I come back and she says, oh, you're here. Would you like some lunch? And I sit there and I go, okay, I understand all the memory loss, but something that vivid. You almost died in a flood and you just ate a hamburger and she none of it. Well, you just realize the severity of it, and it can work that way with depression as well. Now let me give you the other side as I'm thinking. There are people like what we call moderate depression or dysthymia that are on medication, like Prozac or Zoloft, which you've probably heard. And they did an interesting study and found that if they take 100 people, let's say, Prozac, 100 people, and you gradually take you off of Prozac, but put you on an exercise program, but the people on the exercise program did as well as those who had stayed on their medicine. What's that? Well, you're clearly saying the more mild to moderate problems are more amenable to all the health things, all the good things that Jesus has taught us, and all the health things. I mean, we know to eat right and exercise and sleep and have friends and be active and all that sort of stuff. That there is a level that those things, in fact, in this case, did as much good as medication. My friend I talked to, I said, I want you to be aware of this study. Now, this doesn't mean you quit your medication and suddenly just say, well, I'm just going to go on an exercise program. But what it says is going from severe to moderate to mild can be very different sorts of things. And let me just to give some specific examples, which makes it difficult. This is one that kind of makes it difficult. People who are in prison for aggressive behaviors, what we call psychopaths, or like what used to be called psychopaths. We think you should not steal, you should not kill, you should not injure people. That clearly goes against God. But here's what's interesting. When you study the brains of people who are in prison for those sorts of disorders, there's at least 7 areas of the brain that are not working the way they should. The part of the brain in the frontal part that helps you think and make decisions does not work. The part of the brain that's emotional that would say, this is making me anxious, and so it doesn't work as well. The part of the brain that gives you disgust. You read some of these terrible stories, I'm not going to repeat it, of things that people do to women, to their children, to women as children are watching, and you're thinking, at what point do you not just feel such disgust that you say, I can't do it? Well, the part of their brain that mediates that is not working. And so, now to me, that doesn't mean that, oh, well, we just say you're not responsible, your brain is, you're still responsible and still have to work to get better. And there are programs that help you get better. But there's that chemical element, biological element as well.
Okay, I want to move on to another kind of topic, because I think we've said some things about that one that's helpful. One of the things that I'm thinking about that could be relevant for us in our class, right, is the relationship between our spiritual lives and our mental health. So we've already alluded to this a little bit, but I'm thinking about things like, does prayer matter? Does confession matter? What's the relationship between mental health and spiritual life? Or you might think about it this way: if you were in a counseling setting and you were talking to a Christian person committed to Jesus Christ, reading their Bible and such, and you were talking to someone who's just, stone cold atheist, doesn't do a spiritual life, would there be things that you might say differently, or insights you might make to be different? What's the relationship, spiritual life, mental health?
Yes. Now, here's how I think of it. You would say things differently. But here's my thought. When Genesis, and I think you referred to this well, when Genesis refers to the fact that we are created in God's image and that we are to be in dominion over things, as a human being, we have capacities. And I think God has made our bodies in a certain way so that, for instance, if you meditate and relax, you're going to be calmer. If you are around relationships, you're going to have more energy, and you're going to have more purpose in your life. If you, think positive things, you're going to be more positive. I think that is the way we are made, and that continues to work even if your focus isn't spirituality. If your focus is spirituality, you're doing that for very different reasons. But it's so if I'm dealing with a Christian, I may say something like, let's go to God in prayer, and let's confess, and let's state our trust, and let's ask the Spirit to come into our lives, whatever you may do. If I'm dealing with an atheist, usually, by the way, people would know that I would be a Christian. I didn't try to convert them, but they'd know I'd be a Christian. But I would say, here's how this makes sense in your spiritual life. I taught a class on personality, it showed the overlap. Because if you want to know in 30 seconds what personality, the different personality theories that have come about in the last, say, whatever, 120 years, they're going to focus on different things. And the deal is what I told the students is not, to me, it's not either or, it's all the above. But they focus on unconscious processes. Well, Romans says, I don't know what I'm doing. What I mean to do, I don't want to do. And what I don't want to do, I do. I do not understand what I'm doing. That's kind of unconscious. One of the theories of personality has to do with environmental contingents, reward and punishment. Well, I think the Bible talks about reward and punishment, doesn't it? Some talk about interpersonal relationships. Some talk about the way you think. And so it's called a cognitive approach, if you know about that. So the idea is we're anxious or depressed because of what we are thinking. And so what they do is they help you to look at what you're thinking and how you may be causing yourself anxiety. Well, the Bible says, doesn't it? As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Whatever is good, noble, and right, think on these things. A man is be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so what you find is every personality theory has its correlates in Christianity. And I think the reason of that is that God has made all of us to function a certain way. Now, Christianity deals with it in a focused way. Let me say one thing, and I probably want to make sure there's some questions too, but let me mention this. I have a couple of things to say in terms of, well, how are they different? Well, first of all, let me mention Christianity in the Bible was never meant to be a mental health book, handbook. We're talking about God and Christ dying for us, going to the grave, rising from the dead. That's what Christianity is about. So I'm not worried so much about, well, they seem to overlap some things. That's what it's about. And I love, if you study sociology and the like, this is the fact that there's something specific to Christianity that goes beyond what is true for all people. There is what they call death and rebirth archetypes, mythology, that there are stories all over the world for thousands of years of God dying and being raised from the dead. There's a story I love from a Native American culture in which the idea is life comes out of death. And so you say, here's the story. An Indian village was having trouble. They were starving, and a young man comes into the village who's very brilliant and he's very wise, and he kind of teaches them some things. And then one morning he's gone. And they go to try to find him, and they find him at the top of a mountain. He has died, and maize or corn, a stalk of maize or corn, is growing out of his heart. Well, what is that? Well, the idea is somehow or other, for there to be life, there was death. So death and rebirth archetype. Hindu religion the same way. You have God, the creator, sustainer, destroyer, who destroys things so that things can be created. All of that is good. And you say, well, how is Christianity special? Because in Christianity, in the Apostles' Creed, it says, and we believe that Jesus was born of a virgin. He suffered under Pontius Pilate, died and buried and rose again. Now that's a bit different. When I say, well, when did this Indian story happen about the mass? Well, long ago. Did it really happen? It's a myth. It's a story that gives a principle of death and rebirth. But Jesus, we know he died under Pontius Pilate. You can go to, there's a stone that has Pontius Pilate's name on it. So it's concrete, it's specific, it's based upon Christ, and that's the difference. I mean, there's a fulfillment there that's different than saying you have been made where if you walk, you'll be healthy if you meditate.
You might think about like the heavens declare the glory of God, the earth proclaims his handiwork. We know that's true, but Scripture tells us something in addition to that, something special. And so there may be things that are true for all of us about like, that God intended us to be creatures that both are active and rest. But then he also to Israel says, no, you keep the Sabbath. There's a particular kind of form of this. All right, I've got one last question, I think, and then I want to open it up to you guys. And if y'all don't ask questions, then I'll just keep asking. Also, can y'all tell that Dr. Cameron was my teacher and one of my favorite teachers? Have you noticed how he moves around up here and how I move around up here and his hair and my hair? This is my just absolute hero. I'm sitting up here just like, oh, I love this. So y'all have to forgive me. I'm just kind of a fanboy up here.
It was fun to have Mac in class. He never had to. I never had to call on him to have him say something. No.
Well, they know that.
What's funny, his wife Jenny. I had her in class, and it was years later that I found out. And the deal is, he was in an honor psychology class that also had some psych majors. Well, when you're a freshman in a psych major, you may not be in a psych major. You may not even like psych. You're just so probably Jenny was in a class that didn't talk as much, and she said, "Here's the deal. At 10:05, you'd say, well, here's a question. Jenny, what do you think?" So she would answer the question. 30 minutes later, I'd say, "I'm wondering about this. Jenny, what do you think?" She said, "You were calling on me all the time." Like you'd forgotten that you'd ever called on me. So she must be pretty smart and have a lot of good things.
That's true. Yeah. All right, so here's my practical question. And I think this is one that I've heard from some of y'all, and I didn't really feel very confident to answer, so I wanted to get your take on this. Let's say somebody is in this class, and they say, I'm a Christian, and in the past, maybe it's because I was afraid, maybe it's because it wasn't part of the normal culture that I grew up in, or for whatever reason. Maybe it was some of these things you talked about back at the beginning about why we might be hesitant about using mental health resources, whether that's counseling or medication or whatever. But someone says, I think I am struggling with some of this. I feel like I have some of these symptoms that we keep using as examples in class. Or the holidays are coming up, and I really am nervous to get together with my family, and I find I'm not sleeping well, and I think maybe I should talk to someone. What advice would you have for a Christian person in concretely, making the step from, I think I should get some help, to getting some help? Do they go to their physician, their primary care physician? They go to a counselor? Should they see a Christian counselor as opposed to whomever counselor? What are some just kind of general heuristic, general advice we might offer?
Yeah, see, I think all the above can work. It is, but and the deal is what you would want to know through your community and friends, or perhaps the physician, who has a good reputation and who maybe would work best for my problem. So sometimes your doctor would know, sometimes a good friend would know. I'm not sure I have anything particular to answer with that, except to say this. Let me see what I'm thinking. Realize that, by the way, there's probably horror stories everywhere. There's some counselor somewhere who, whatever. For the most part, though, counselors are taught to accept the world to accept you within your worldview. To say, so for instance, I've seen a Muslim before, and she had on the hijab. I mean, nowhere in there did I say, we're working on assertiveness, and nowhere do I say, now you tell your husband you don't want to wear this hijab. I work within there, and so what you hope and what I expect is that most therapists, counselors, social workers, will work within your worldview, even if they are not a Christian. Part of it, I think, is mindset. Is consistent with what we're talking about. I don't go to a counselor and say, "You just tell me what to do, and I'll do anything." What I do, I go with it, with my life, with my Christianity, with my idea, and I say, working with you, can you help, and what do we do?
That sounds important. I hope that y'all heard that. When we go to get help from somebody, we don't surrender our agency. We don't set aside our whole religion and say, I'm at such a terrible place, I can't do anything, you fix me. Even though sometimes we people maybe feel like they have to get to that point before they reach out for help. So I just think that's an important thing you're saying. I want y'all to be sure to hear that we go looking for aid and help, but not for a remaking of many things. And like naming it as a discrete problem, I think sounds pretty helpful. What questions do you guys have that you'd like to hear Dr. Cameron speak about? And if it's very long, I'm going to call on the most shy people in class, so help them out. David?
I think
Can I just repeat real quick what just what David said here? He asked about Romans chapter 1. Paul says God gave them up, God gave them over, God gave them up to, and the quote is a reprobate mind. I think that's the King James version. Is this God doing something to their mental health, or is this just a manner of speaking?
And I would say the least important thought is that will overlap with things dealing with psychology. But I think what he's saying is he is turning you over to a reprobate mind in a way that you are no longer seeking God. You are hardened and things like that. And I think that God can do that. Now, here's the main thing. In the book of Romans, whether it's the reprobate mind or it's in chapter 9 through 11 where it talks about God hardening people, I don't think God ever turned you over or hardened you to leave you there. I think there was and so people that have been hardened can become open again. But during that time, I think, yes, your thought processes are messed up. You're not thinking about God. I mean, if God is real and you're thinking, no, there is no God, then your thinking is messing up. Interesting story with Pharaoh. The Bible talks about Pharaoh and hardening Pharaoh's heart. He hardened the servant's heart. It's very interesting that he says he hardened the servant's heart. 3 verses later, they're saying, Pharaoh, you need to give this up. And so when God hardens or turns you over, the idea is kind of like where it talks about turn this brother over to Satan so that he can see the light. So that's how I sense it.
Also worth noting, David, in that passage, Paul's audience, or what he's talking about there, is not individuals, but rather the Gentiles. So he's talking about whole cultures that, as a culture, have done this, gone after idols and such. And I think that sometimes he speaks in that way, and we ought not take it as each individual in the culture necessarily embodies the norms of that culture. What are the questions? Uncle Grant, and then David again. Okay. Yeah, can I just kind of tell him about that? So what Uncle Grant's alluding to is saying that if you're a member of this congregation and you say, I think I might like to see a counselor about something. The church has a partnership with Life Within Counseling here in town. Thomas Ritchie is the guy who runs that. Jenny works with them, does the business side of their, that she doesn't do counseling, she does the business side. Lots of family therapists, licensed. Jenny, tell me the title here, because it's not psychologist, but professional counselors, various professional counselors there. And the church does offer subsidies for that. If you're interested in that, the person to talk to one of the elders, but Matt usually can tell you about that too. He works with you on that. So that's here in town. They also have offices in Searcy and Cabot as well. So that's a good practical thing to mention. I'm glad you mentioned it. Brother David, you had another question?
Why don't you take care of yourself? What are you doing? Well, you realize that's part of the problem. And so, and I'm not making specific application here, but for instance, part of what I mentioned when I say Christianity is different because it's based upon the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Psychology is different because of the specific things they can study to understand the role of certain aspects. So, for instance, dopamine is a neurotransmitter. Dopamine, among other things, is what gets us out of bed in the morning. The difference between I'm in bed and I lay there for a day and I think breakfast and get up is dopamine. Well, people, for instance, I'm not diagnosing here, but people with schizophrenia have issues with dopamine. And so, you give medication for that. But the deal is there are neurochemicals that make a difference, areas of the brain. You finished? Can I just mention a couple of things? When you say like in psychology or things like, the Bible is not meant to be a mental health manual. And so we can discover through science things to help. For instance, if you have a phobia, there's been studies that show that if you take a beta blocker while you're being re-exposed to the thing you're afraid of, that it helps you not to be afraid anymore. Now, re-exposure is part of how you deal with you say, I'm afraid of spiders, where you get gradually close to spiders, but what they found is almost instantaneous. Now, this is a study. What you find is it could be a one-time thing or two-time thing. Here, touch the spider. Touch the spider? Yeah, touch the tarantula while you're taking this beta blocker, which is used for that. And it helps you. Where in the Bible does it say if you've experienced a trauma, that the way to deal with it in large part over time, not right away, but if it's continuing problem, that you re-experience the trauma. You talk about it. You get around people that can support you. There may be, but I'm just saying there's things that you study in psychology. The last one, there's so many, and this is new. People with post-traumatic stress have been treated with hypobaric oxygen, which, like a lot of times, if you have injury, of course, it's pure oxygen. You hear that? They found doing neurological studies that people with trauma who have procedure have areas of their brain that grow that help them deal with trauma. So psychology has a lot to offer, but salvation is not it. So all that distinction, but the Bible wasn't meant for it. I wish it would have told me the cure, but it doesn't. That was its purpose.
Well, I've been so blessed by this conversation. I hope you guys have too. We're over time, so I'll just say thank you for being here. If you have questions about this that you want to bring up, I'm happy to pass those along and we can talk about answering that in the classes. Thank you guys so much.